So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Strategy Café. I am Roseanna and I will be hosting today's Alembic Strategy Café. So I hope you've all had a chance this morning to grab a coffee or a tea. And then in a moment, I'll be introducing the lovely Susannah Brade-Waring, who's here to talk about all things motivation and how we've experienced the past 18 months. But before I do, I just want to thank you for tuning in to today's session. A bit of housekeeping, so please invite questions, you can post them into the questions area. There's a little drop down and you can ask those questions and we'll cover them as we go, but if we don't have a chance, then we'll cover them at the end and we'll have time dedicated to questions at the end. As always, if you think today's session has been great and fun and you think a friend, a colleague will benefit from tuning in, then there'll be a recording of this. So after today's session, you'll be able to share it and please feel free to do so. So here is Susannah and we'll be digging into the state of play and how motivation has affected us, organisations that we have worked with. And we are certainly seeing that clients are really feeling the need to engage in a conversation around how their employers are feeling, what their needs are, and how they've responded to perhaps the organisational changes that we've all faced. So without further ado, I will introduce Susannah. So we met a few years ago through our advisory network, Mindshot, at an annual conference, and Susannah was doing this amazing keynote on motivation and how by looking at motivation in more detail, you can really start to unlock the performance of your team. And she was just an amazing speaker, and we've been working more closely with her ever since. Susannah made the shift from finance director to set up your own advisory business, and you're now running that as a family business, so with your husband and now your son Kyle. So Susannah, welcome. I'm delighted to be able to have time with you this morning. What a privilege for me to chat, to hear about and just share your insights. So welcome, Susannah.
Good morning, Roseanna. Good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you. It's very kind of you to say such lovely things as well.
So let's get straight into it. I think it's fair to say that the situation we've found ourselves in has been completely unpredictable over the last 18 months. But actually, I think we were saying this, pre-pandemic, we were talking about the VUCA world, for the last 5-10 years, and actually the amount of change that we've faced. And when we were chatting before today's session, Susannah was describing this as sort of VUCA plus. And I think when we reflect on the specific organisation and leadership challenges that we've faced, you were saying that, some organisations have actually found, or experienced 5 years of change in just 18 months. And actually that poses a question then, how have people responded to that organisational change? So maybe you just want to speak to this slide and, that sense of organisational change and the people's response to that.
Of course, and I think it might be helpful just to explain as well kind of how I got into this. So I think like many people, I didn't really know what my passion was. I just kind of followed the normal kind of route and being very fortunate as well to have the kind of parents and teachers who recommended going to university. So I did ergonomics as my first degree, which is that whole man-machine interface, which plays very nicely actually into kind of where we are now, which is if there is too much overwhelm, then the technology can cope, but humans can't cope, and then accidents happen, and mistakes happen, and people burn out. And of course, that is what we have been seeing. And I really gained my passion for business by just ending up helping out my dad as he started his second business, and basically picking up anything that wasn't being done. So all the finance, HR, all the commercial contracts, all the IT, etc., and then growing that to over £10 million of turnover and eventually doing a management buyout. And that's where my passion for a couple of things came from. So the first one was that when you're growing a strong business, you can't grow that business unless you also grow a strong team who take ownership and responsibility. Therefore, there has to be motivation for them within that. And then, that kind of second piece really is, if you're going to change, then it's okay having a great plan, but actually if you haven't engaged people in your plan, how can we expect them to suddenly buy into something that they were never asked their opinion on, but actually affects them? So that was my motivation for actually going, I really need to understand people. And as you say, Roseanna, actually, the more you go into that, the more you really understand what's going on for people, what sits beneath that behaviour and that attitude, and the more, of course, that I, would want to be able to understand that and to predict and influence that as well. But obviously in an empathetic way. So, as you say, we've been talking about this kind of VUCA world, this kind of, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous for a long time. And that's partly because we have known the scale of growth in technology has far outpaced humans' ability to be able to keep up with it. So there was a time, long time ago when we could understand what was going on, keep up with it, whereas now we know that we can't know all of the apps, all the technology, all different systems, because there are just too many of them, and so you just have to be very focused. But pre-pandemic, I'm looking at this and going, we're in this world where we have all this technology which is meant to make life easier for us and better and add quality to our lives, and yet we were experiencing the greatest levels of mental ill health. We all have mental health, positive health and negative health. So we're experiencing the greatest numbers of mental ill health. We're experiencing the largest amounts of personal debt. Stress, it's like how long can this society, in the way that we're working, actually carry on at a point where it's healthy? And then, of course, Brexit, which has had and continues to have massive impact, particularly in this country, and then COVID. So, and as you said, actually, there's technology like Zoom that we were using probably 7 years ago, and we've been kind of frustrated in terms of, when are people going to, start using this? And trying to encourage them to use it, then all of a sudden everyone's forced into this world of having to adopt it really quickly, and Teams, but also forcing that cloud computing and going paperless. There's a huge amount of shifts that have been going on as well.
Yeah, and it's about this idea of the race here, isn't it? And this the feeling that we're sort of racing to keep up with someone, and not really knowing what we are keeping up with, I suppose.
That's exactly it, because there's an element of we keep up because everyone else is keeping up, and if we don't keep up, then we're going to be left behind. So, but do we want to even be in this race? Sometimes we have to step back and to refocus on, why are we doing this? What's our purpose here? And if you go back to quite ancient textbooks now, like Good to Great, a lot of those organizations that in those days were the best performing no longer exist, because the race has changed. So for me, there's something about being very present and conscious about going, who do we want to be as an organization? What do we want to contribute and stand for? And therefore, what's our race, and how do we want to run that race? It is also at the same time making sure that we're on the front foot, we're staying agile and able to adapt and pivot and change in the way that we want to.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of that. It can feel like a tale of two sides there. So, you know, on one hand, we want to be on the front foot, but how do we do that whilst actually maybe taking a step back and looking at the big picture and actually going, well, why are we going so quickly? Maybe having that time just to, you know, take a pause, revisit, refresh, and, you know, think big picture. And that can feel quite like opposing things that you're doing, but actually I think what you're saying is being able to sort of sometimes slow the pace down and just be clear what you're going after, clear what race you're in, actually then helps you be on the front foot so that you don't get sort of left behind, so to speak.
And that's the role of leaders, isn't it? It's really interesting when you look at leaders, and there are so many films where we can say, you know, look at the good behaviours that are being demonstrated here and what they're doing and how they're doing it. But in most of those films, those leaders very often come from the sport. They're not playing, they're not on the pitch, they're not in the race. They're actually being able to step back and take the bigger strategic view. But we know the reality is that leaders in business and managers in business, if they're lucky, they have half a day a week to be able to actually lead and manage, to work on the strategy, to be able to step back and to see who's doing well, who's not doing well, and what's working well and what's not working well in the business, and then move forward with that.
Yeah. I suppose it brings us on to, you know, that's sort of quite a good description of, you know, the sort of macro. I'm sure there's been lots of headaches for people over the last 18 months, particularly, that have been presented to leaders. And, you know, we were chatting about some of the headaches that leaders are presenting with at the moment. And I just wonder what you're seeing with, you know, in the work that you do, what some of the big headaches are, and maybe what, I don't know, the pain relief for those are.
So it's the same across a huge amount of industries right now. And I think one of the things that COVID really has done is kind of unified these headaches and the landscape. You know, the landscape was pretty much wiped clean for lots of industries. And we've had to kind of almost like redraw it and lean on each other to go, what are you seeing? What are you finding? What's happening? So across most industries now is this challenge around capacity. So with a real challenge around recruitment and a real challenge in terms of employee retention, and coupled with that, of course, then is predictability and absenteeism, because of course people being ill. There's a lot of catch up on annual leave over the summer and the months going into summer. Now going into winter, you know, with more COVID and self-isolation and the knock-on effects of that, it's this not only a reduced level of workforce to be able to deliver the work, but also the unpredictability of that resource as well, that is probably the biggest challenge right now for leaders.
Yeah, I've just had a question in from Nick, who's asking, what is Susannah's advice for leaders in increasing their strategy and leadership time from half a day a week? I suppose that's referencing actually a lot of leaders are having to sort of go in and do a lot more of the day-to-day because of the headaches that you've explained. So what advice do you have for leaders sort of upping their strategy and leadership time?
It depends on what is causing them to be in the business so much. And I can only sort of give you a couple of examples. So the clients that we tend to work with, I call them ambitious and big-hearted. So they want to grow, they want to be the best they can be, they want to be great employers, they want to give great customer service. And that's part of the ambition, but also the big-hearted, because then they find it hard to actually be quite tough on performance management and quite tough in sometimes sacking some of their clients who aren't great clients. So there's actually quite a bit of waste in these organizations, and sometimes it's about going, you know what, you need to kind of bite the bullet now. I heard a fabulous phrase from some colleagues of ours, Roseanna, who are in also in the business advisory group, James Lane, Mark Curtis, and they said profits paper over a lot of cracks. I just thought that is spot on. Profits paper over a lot of cracks. You know, when the business is doing well, there's a lot of things that we just let go because things are going okay, we're doing all right. But now, when actually times are tough, those cracks start to open up, and we can't build on them. So, in terms of, you know, some specific advice I'm giving to some of our clients is actually they need to be able to focus and start addressing some of these issues. It does mean kind of putting a bit more time in, but at the same time, they've also got to go, well, what am I going to stop doing then? And it may be that some of these growth projects, they actually just push back 3 months, 6 months, while they address some of these issues inside the business and really decide to tackle them. And if they're not allowed to, because they make that decision to not do their growth project until they've actually addressed these issues in the business, that's quite good motivation for getting them sorted.
Yeah.
Having said that, of course, it's a challenge, because if you can't recruit, then people want to hang on to the people they've got. And I'm always kind of looking around and taking kind of stock and going, oh, you know, I'm very curious. You know, so I was watching Moneyball. So Moneyball is a film about baseball, and it is based on a true story. Have you seen it, Roseanna?
I haven't. It's one that I've wanted to watch, so this is being my impetus to go watch it.
Okay.
Yeah, the
So
list.
it's basically a true story where a baseball team didn't have the budget of the big baseball team, so they took the kind of the misfits, the people who actually had some real strengths but some very obvious weaknesses. And what they did was focus on their strengths. They were very, very clear around, like, you are great at doing this, do more of this, you're not good at doing this, stop doing this. And that changed the whole strategy of the way that they recruit talent. And I think that we can be more honest as leaders, which will then encourage our teams to be more vulnerable in actually going, you know what, I'm not good at this. So I need you to help me to work around this, because if we can't admit our weaknesses, we cover them up. And we get through it, but it takes a lot longer. Whereas if we can be really honest about, actually, you know what, we're really good at this and not good at this, we build stronger teams. So there's not one solution, Nick, but it's definitely around going, actually, let's address the issues in the business and then build on the back of that.
Yeah. I suppose bringing the conversation on to motivation, one of the things that we, have an early conversation with our clients is around, the energy that you have and bring to the work and the motivation, but also encouraging that conversation throughout the business, and how you actually embody leadership and embody those intentions through, the energy that you have and the motivations that you have. And I suppose one of the things that I was reflecting on, when we were going to have this chat was around, when we think about motivation, we think about how static or dynamic is that, and has the last 18 months and, the shift in the landscape actually shifted our motivations. And as I said at the beginning, seeing a lot of appetite for leaders to engage in this conversation, but is that because people's core motivations and beliefs have changed, or is it just an environmental shift and we're just still working that out and that's still confusing? I just wondered what your experience and what you've seen in terms of, has there been a motivation shift for staff, employees, and maybe even leaders too?
Okay, so in terms of motivation and beliefs, the two things are interlinked, and our beliefs actually influence how motivated we are and that energy. So can just recapping on some of the things you said there, Roseanna, absolutely, we have to have energy, we have to kind of bring that drive to the business, and leaders have to have more of it, because they have to almost carry the energy for the whole team. And when the rest of the team are a bit down, the leader has to have that energy. It's also associated with resilience and persistence and determination, which can also be called stubbornness, which is not necessarily a bad thing, providing it's heading in the right direction. So I think we all acknowledge we need to have energy and drive that's heading in the right direction, which is aligned with the business strategy and goals. Where does that energy kind of come from? So I specialize in a tool called Motivational Maps, which you are experienced practitioners of, And that is an analytic tool in a sense, which actually measures exactly what people are motivated by and the level to the degree to which those motivators are satisfied. So then we can tell, actually, are they really enjoying their work? Is it fulfilling them and therefore energizing them? Or is it draining their batteries? And we've not had as much data as we normally have during COVID, because of course people have been furloughed or there's been uncertainty. So, and of course people kind of pulling back on the budgets to do with looking after their teams. But in terms of the data we have had, it has not shown a big shift in motivation. So in terms of what motivates people. So we had some questions, and I'm one of the senior practitioners, so one of 5 senior practitioners globally. So I have insights from a few different continents, and we would expect Defender, which is so sorry, let's step back. So one of the tools that Motivational Maps is based on is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it starts with security at the bottom, belonging, feeling valued, moving into being motivated by money and authority, so being in charge, knowledge, innovation, freedom, and at the top about making a difference and having meaning and purpose. So we wondered whether actually people would revert more to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of actually, I need more certainty, more security, more ability to plan, and I need to pull those friendships around me because of the uncertainty of COVID. We're not seeing that in the data that we're getting from the workplace. So people may want that personally, but we're not getting that from the workplace. What I think we are seeing is a shift in what is important to some people. So some people have taken stock, they have reevaluated, they have gone, actually, I believe that I can achieve my job and have more freedom. And that might be a want. So some people want more freedom to be able to go off and do other things with their lives, and rather than being necessarily tied to the desk in an office. Other people, I think, need more freedom, even though it doesn't necessarily motivate them. And that might be because they're looking after family and loved ones, and therefore they need to have more flexibility. And I think it's important for us as employers to understand the difference between the two, whether it's the need or something that actually motivates them.
Yeah, and I suppose what I'm just thinking about is, there's the assumption and go, okay, we've all had a massive shift, so we all might be motivated by something different or not. But actually, it's just an assumption that we have, and until we go and, ask the question in a really open and friendly and gentle way, you actually don't really know. And I think sort of having those measure points are really helpful, just to make sure. And even where there's, perhaps as you're saying, not being as much of a shift in direction, maybe as much as you might think, actually the specifics of that might have changed. So flexibility or change might have meant something different to that person 2 years ago. It means something different now, perhaps. I suppose it kind of leads on to what you describe as the performance triangle, and it's about how motivation actually speaks to performance, and it's not the only component, is it? So there are other things at play. Perhaps you'd just like to speak to the other 2 points that are part of your performance triangle.
Yeah, I'd love to, because for me, some of this stuff is so intangible that it's hard to kind of get a grasp on, whereas models like this make it much easier to simplify and kind of to get a shared understanding around. So there are 3 core components of performance. There's the direction, which is our strategy, our vision, our mission, our OKRs, so our objectives and key results, KPIs, and that should translate therefore into departmental objectives, to specific job roles and responsibilities and expected outcomes. So that's all the direction piece. we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy on the capability piece. And within the capability, I've added not just skills, but also well-being and resources. So we need to be able to have the skills to be able to achieve our direction, and things like skills matrices are really useful there to map out the skills required versus the skills actually that individuals have got and a team has got. We also need to have resources. So it may well be, you know, that you and I have the skill to have this conversation, Roseanna, but actually if the IT lets us down, we don't have the resources, we can't perform. And then we have to have the well-being. So do we have enough physical and mental well-being as well to be able to perform? And this is kind of where that mental health, the stress, looking after ourselves physically also helps as well. But the third element to this is the one that is most intangible and therefore the one that's most untapped, because we'll all have examples of people who they know what to do, they have the skills to do it, but they have very little interest or will to actually do that particular task. So motivation is the third element to performance. And what is motivation? It's energy, it's drive. But energy and drive to achieve what? Is to fulfill our own needs and wants. So in that performance, Roseanna's just going to share another slide here in terms of what feeds motivation. Well, if our motivation are our needs and wants, and if we believe that our needs and wants will be achieved by delivering that direction, then we have a win-win between the organisation and the individual, and that's massively important. We have this win-win. But and then those needs and wants come in those 9 different kind of flavours, which are that expanded version of Maslow's hierarchy. So security, innovation, money, authority, desire to make a difference, etc. But what sits behind that are our beliefs. And so in this diagram where there are 2 different triangles, pyramids, the one on the left-hand side is one of direction, capability, and motivation. The one on the right-hand side then is what's the source of motivation. 20% of it comes from our personality, which is pretty much fixed and in the past. 80% comes from our beliefs. So our beliefs, which about what's happening right now, forms our self-concept. So based on the evidence of what I'm seeing, feeling, hearing, I have an understanding of who I am, but also my expectations and my future beliefs. And linking those 2 triangles is a reward strategy. So if making a difference is important to me, and I believe that in this job I can actually make a difference, I need to have some feedback to actually know that I am making a difference. And making a difference means so many things to so many different people. So you're right, Roseanna, you need to have a conversation going. So what I can see making a difference is important to you, but how will you know when you're making a difference? What does that look like for you in this particular role? And so we need to be able to have that feedback mechanism that goes, I believe I can achieve this in this role with this organisation. Am I actually achieving it or not? And when we believe we're achieving it, when we get the feedback, then we have a strong belief, and that results in strong energy, strong drive.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take a pause because we're coming up to 9 o'clock. So just please pile in your questions into the questions area and we will cover them. We've just got a couple more slides and then we'll come to questions. So please just pile in. We'd be happy to answer them. So I suppose taking this theory and these sort of concepts, what can we actually do about that? So what can we take away from today's conversation? What can you guys take away and really actually start thinking about this in a little bit more detail? So we have got a checklist here, and we thought perhaps take a headache that you are experiencing, a leadership challenge that you're having, and you're thinking about these different high performance areas, and let's just do a bit of a gap analysis on that. So vision and goals. Have you got clear goals? Have you set yourself goals? Do your team have clear goals on what they're trying to achieve? Are there agreed expectations Is it clear who needs to do what? Are roles properly documented? Skills. So do you have the skills to be able to get this done properly, quickly, efficiently, and with good quality? You know, are things being done? You know, are you meeting your current well-being needs? How are you measuring that? The resources, you know, what resources do you need, and how are you, you know, what do you need? Is there anything missing? I know that that's maybe a big thing for people at the moment in terms of either supply chain or, you know, people resources. And then we have aligned motivations. So how can the goals of the organisation fulfil the team's motivation? And then the reward strategy. So is there a feedback? You know, is there a reward strategy for those, you know, their core motivators? Do you know when you're getting feedback around your motivations? So this is a nice gap analysis just to give you a sense of where you're at and maybe what needs a focus on here. And really we're thinking about how do we measure those things? You know, vision and goals, you know, have you got those written down somewhere, those goals for yourself? Agreed expectations, you know, are people delivering on those expectations? How often do they get delivered on time? Skills, you know, are there errors being shown? Well-being, you know, how are you measuring that? You know, one measure is around absenteeism, and there are other sort of pulse checks that you can do around well-being. Perhaps resources comes to sort of how efficient things are being done. You know, are things taking longer than usual? And then aligned motivation and reward strategies is really where motivational maps come in and really give you a sense of how aligned the team's motivation is against the organisational goals, and also how fulfilled people are in their own motivations. So it just providing you a nice checklist here just to take away and give you a sense of where you're at.
That's great, Roseanna. I think, you know, I think as you say, you have to be able to take something practical away from this. So I think if there's anything that I was going to recommend, it would be just a sense of the context in terms of how fast things are moving, and just reflecting on actually, do you want to move at that pace? Are you in the right race? The second one is around everybody is struggling right now with the workforce, with the team, in terms of being able to recruit, in terms of that kind of predictability, and that people are just feeling tired. So if that's what you're experiencing, and maybe you're having a higher than normal staff turnover, it's kind of normal. It doesn't mean it's good or desirable, but at least, you know, you can get a sense that it's not just you, it's more industry wide. And then that third takeaway for me would be that performance triangle. And as Roseanna said, actually just going, if we need to make sure we've got direction, capability, and motivation, you know, where are we in terms of our vision? You know, are we on track? Are we not? If not, how clear is the goal? How clear is the expectations on outcomes and behaviour? Where are we on capability? And actually, do we know what our people want and need? And, you know, they may have signed up to a job, but if the job has changed, how we're delivering it has changed, and perhaps what they want and need has also changed, are we still in alignment? And we need to have a conversation around that to make sure we understand what they want and need from their job, and also make sure they're getting that feedback, whatever that looks like, whether that's more authority or decision making, being asked their opinions, getting more feedback, they're making a difference, some level of security. They're getting that feedback to go, this works for me and my needs and wants are being met in this job.
Yeah. It sort of brings us on to the question of, you know, what's the organisation's role versus what's the individual's role in motivation, and, you know, what can organisations do? I suppose just before I do that, maybe it's just worth sort of just coming back to this, and, you know, there's a now, there's a where, and there's a gap. So on this checklist, you know, take it away, we can send you a PDF, but, you know, really honestly score where you are now. where do you want to be in 6 months' time, a year's time? You know, what are you, and where are the gaps then that are forming? And then be really clear around, okay, what's the one thing that you can do to reduce that gap? So maybe there's one action under each, and really start to go, okay, we've got a sense of a bit of a motivation gap or a performance gap or whatever your, you know, your headache is. But actually, okay, let's go through this checklist and bring a bit of granularity to actually where we are now and the honesty around that, you know, the ambition for what that could be, and then just a simple one action under each might just give you one thing to take away with today. So I suppose then, what do organisations, you know, offer? What's their responsibility, and you know, what's their role? Is sort of an interesting question when we're thinking about motivation specifically. And this was your slide, Susannah, so I'll let you talk to this.
Yeah, so I think what we know from the data is that people choose their roles, but also the organisation they work for based on their needs and wants. So typically we will see a lot more motivation around defender being in corporates, because a corporate provides that long-term security. You can go in there, you can stay in the organisation, there is a career plan, there's a good pension, all those kind of things. Whereas people who want more kind of freedom will tend to be more in the creative kind of space, and even interestingly, someone was saying to me yesterday, more kind of maybe the legal profession likes a bit more of that kind of freedom as well. I also see creativity there, that ability to be able to come up with solutions and ideas that nobody else has. And this example down here, for me, is just a fabulous example where the army was struggling to recruit. This is several years ago, and they worked at one of the things they offer, one of the qualities they offer to people is a sense of belonging. And so they ran job adverts based on this is belonging, and all of the imagery conveyed that sense of what belonging means. And the army deliberately recruits people who perhaps have felt they've never belonged, they've been a bit of a misfit, a bit outside of society, and they crave that sense of being included, involved, one of the team. So they're very clear on that, and their recruitment shot up. But the slide here is kind of going, look, if we're plugging ourselves in, we have to take responsibility for understanding our own needs and wants. So if this person here is trying to plug themselves in and they're looking for belonging, but the organisation or the team is all around innovation, they're not going to get charged up, therefore they're not going to get motivated, and therefore they're not going to perform, and at some point they're going to fall out. People who are innovative quite often need to run at a pace and with ideas that means they're more likely to be working on their own, whereas someone who loves belonging is more likely to really thrive on teamwork. And so those two things can be incompatible. So there is a responsibility on both the employer and the employee to understand what do we both want, and actually is there alignment that we can fulfill this? You know, literally, you know, does that, can we charge your batteries here?
Yeah, we've had a question come in that is asking, how do you know when you need to align people's motivation within the business more? Are there sort of, you know, classic trigger points that you spot when actually maybe the plug and the plug socket aren't quite aligned? How do you know when you need to do
performance? You know, so example right now, I mean, a classic one is, you know, someone said yesterday to me, when we've got overtime going, if members of our team want the extra money, then they'll do the overtime. When they don't, they won't do it. Now that's one example, but you scale that up and you go, if you've got people who actually you're expecting to hit certain financial targets, but they're not that motivated by money, then actually, you know, how do you incentivize them, encourage them, enthuse them to go after those bigger kind of sales targets, which the organization needs to be able to thrive and support its customers and team members if they're not motivated by money? So, you know, in that particular case, they're more motivated by freedom. So you're going to go, right, how do we actually help them achieve what they want and what we want by creating a win-win. So it comes down to performance, and it comes down to that you're not seeing the behaviours that you want to be able to see. And why is that? There's a lack of alignment.
Yeah, and I suppose then it's about the leadership's role in creating the space to have those conversations and opening those up. So it's dynamic conversations, you know, before it gets to poor performance, I suppose, you know, to creating the environment.
It's not simple, but there are ways and there are means of getting there, and it can be actually, and it has to be part of the culture. You know, so you know, for me, culture is just a word of saying how are things done around here. But you've got to define the culture, and it has to have these clear expectations. I think that we reward people too easily. We give people more trust, more flexibility before they necessarily have showed that they know what to do with that. And then, of course, if they're not performing, we then take it away from them, which is a penalty. Whereas if we were very much clear around our expectations and when they're going to move to the next level, not necessarily in terms of promotion, but just in terms of more delegated trust and authority, actually we can motivate them and give them more of what they want. As I said, it's about creating a win-win.
Yeah. So I just want to leave some time for some further questions. So I'll move the slides on just to wrap up for today, but please, we will have a few minutes just for some final questions. So just summing up from today then, you know, we've discussed the importance of aligning the pace of change that organisations have felt between the organisations and their employees. We've discussed some of the common leadership headaches and what can be done, and also provided a checklist, you know, for really digging into where the gaps might be. So I just really challenge you all. You've all come in and listened today, and we're really grateful to have you on. What's the one thing that you will act on from today? What are you going to take away and commit to yourself for doing, and maybe trying and doing differently? So that's our summary. We have a next strategy coming up, strategy cafe coming up. I think it's going to be in November. But the date and content will be coming soon, so just keep an eye out in your inbox, and we'll confirm the date for you. But you can register to join in on that link below. So just make sure you're signed up for the mailing list, and you'll get all the notifications when it's when the date's live. So we can just come to final questions then. Okay, so Sarah is asking, when there is so much talk about suffering and wellness right now, why is people's defender motivation, so that security and belonging motivation, why is that not coming up more? Do you have any thoughts on that, Susannah?
It's a really interesting one, because the defender motivator, they're not necessarily linked. So wellness and kind of suffering, if you look at that performance triangle, there are arrows, double-headed arrows in between them. So whatever we're motivated by, if that's being fulfilled, then that actually plays into our strengths and our well-being and our confidence. You know, so whatever we're being motivated down by here, so and a common one is purpose. You know, 80% of people we've mapped, 80% are motivated by searcher, which is making a difference, purpose, and having work that's meaningful. So that's quite an easy one for employers and managers to kind of tap into and help people make sure that they explain why, explain the difference that the person's contribution is making, but also does the feedback piece. So whatever it is that we're motivated by, if we're being able to fulfill it, it feeds our well-being and that kind of level of, as I say, resilience and mental well-being. Where this kind of, you know, Sarah's point around kind of, you know, suffering and kind of struggling comes from is more a lack of belief that we can actually make a difference, a lack of belief that we can actually achieve the direction that we can keep up. So it's more about the lack of belief that we can achieve this, And that comes down from, to that very clear direction, the expectations, the consequences as well. I was talking to a company yesterday. They're struggling with that, but that's because some of the people they work with, client-wise, are they need to understand that we are going to be able to make a difference to these people, and we need to have some certainty around what's going to happen to these people. And if these people aren't being very challenging, then actually we need to know that we're safe as well. So it's less about actually a massive need for security, but actually whatever level of defender security they've got, that bit needs to be kind of ticked off.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? We've all got all 9, but in very different quantities. So some people have got a massive need for security and certainty. Some people just need a pinch of that. But whatever they want, they need to know it's being fulfilled.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Susannah. I think we're up to 9:15, and I think that's all for the questions. So just Susannah, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to all our attendees for listening and staying on. It's great to see you all on there. So we'll share a recording as we get it. So just to say thank you all for listening, and to Susannah for providing some fantastic insights as always on our Strategy Cafe. So thank you everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thanks everyone.